Hey YouTube, it's Joel here, and today I'm going to be showing you how I set up this Tokay Gecko enclosure with weather effects. Let's get into it. The enclosure I'm going to be using for this build is the Zoomed Reptibreeze Extra Large 24 by 24 by 48 screen enclosure. The reason I like this enclosure is because it is lightweight, the optimal size for tokays, and easy to move around the house, but it does have drawbacks which I'll get into later. I do want a background for the setup, so here I am measuring some cardboard. This will be a base for the background's materials being used. Unfortunately, I did not know that the bottom substrate tray was so short in height, so I modified it by folding the outside with pond liner. This will make the bottom waterproof since I will be making a false bottom. Here, I am cutting the edges and removing any extra pieces sticking out. I also mark its height on the cardboard for the background so I know not to go into that region. For the 3D background, I applied a layer of Great Stuff's Pond and Stone expanding foam since it will be exposed to water and higher humidity. I also attached a pot for a hanging plant. Once fully cured, I use a utility knife to carve off excess foam and make it look more rock-like. The next step is to add some color, texture, and make it even more waterproof. I'm using the original white drylok waterproofer and tinting it with non-toxic black and blue acrylic paint to get this coloration. This was then applied over the foam. I then mixed a very light gray to be used as highlights and to get a more rock-like texture. After a couple days of curing, I placed the background vertically into the enclosure and siliconed the pond liner to cover any exposed cardboard. To give a more mature and weathered down appearance, I siliconed some dried sphagnum moss into some of the cracks and crevices of the rock background. After moving the enclosure to its permanent home, it was time to start the drainage layer. I use a small layer of hydroballs followed by lava rocks and pebbles. I use a weed blocker mesh to separate this layer from the activated carbon layer, which I use for developing a springtail colony. On top of this, I use one more piece of mesh and use rocks to hold everything down. Finally, for the substrate I'm using a mix of reptisoil, Zoomed's forest floor, New Zealand sphagnum moss, and eco-earth. I use the silicone to attach a couple more decorations to the background, such as branches and roots. Since Tokay geckos are native to Southeast Asia, I want to mostly use plants that also share this native range. For the hanging plant, I'm using this nepenthes that I've had for a couple years, but is no longer making pictures, so I'm hoping it will appreciate this spot more. Here I'm planting a crocodile fern, a bird's nest fern, and of course a pothos which I hope to make grow as a vine. I'm also using some of Josh's frogs plants and moss to spread around the tank. I'm not too sure the specific species names, but I'm using a mixture of different moss types. I'm holding the branches together with moss vines as well as these bendable branches. On top of the soil, I spread out some wood logs as well as leaf litter to support the bioactive environment. For the cleanup crew, I'm adding isopods and reusing some of the previous enclosure substrate, which is teeming with springtails, earthworms, and beneficial bacteria. On the sides of the enclosure, I like to use these magnetic feeding dishes for superworms, mealworms, and hornworms. The coloration also matches the fake rock of the background. Here are some lichen-covered wood pieces. At this point, it was safe to add the animals while I work, so this is my male and female Tokay gecko. At this point, I'm just filling the enclosure with more live moss and branches. Even though they never really drink from bowls, it's a good idea to have one. Although not native to Southeast Asia, I added this vine peperomia as well as this white night plant. Going into heating and lighting, for UVB I'm using the Reptisun T5 high output 5.0 24-inch and plugged it into the ZoomEd day and night timer. Unfortunately, this was the only lighting component that didn't have a ramp, dimming sunset, or sunrise system, so I timed it to turn on after the other lights reach their peak output and 30 minutes before the other lights sunset and turn off. This is so that there is still a gradient for light output and to make it appear naturalistic. For heating, I'm using the ZoomEd Combo Deep Dome Dual Lamp fixture with an 100-watt basking bulb and a ceramic heat emitter. The heat emitter is used mostly at night to provide heat in the dark, but also for supplemental heat during the day. The basking bulb I have attached to the Reptitemp dimming thermostat. This is what the control center initially looks like after opening the product. Once plugged in, I connected the temperature probe and wrapped it around a branch to appear as a vine and placed it directly under the basking spot. I set the peak basking temperature to 99 degrees Fahrenheit since tokays have a general basking temp of 95 to 105 degrees Fahrenheit. In the mornings, I set the ramp up sunrise to start at 8 a.m. and left the default sunrise time frame at 30 minutes, which could be changed as needed, which looks like this. The ramp down sunset starts at 7:30 p.m., reaching complete darkness at 8 p.m. To monitor the ambient temperature and humidity, I'm using the ZoomEd digital thermometer and hygrometer. I superglued the probe wires to the screen perimeter and attempted to make the probes appear as plant roots or vines. The trade-off with using a screen enclosure is that maintaining humidity can be very difficult, but I'll go into how I regulate this a bit later. Although I have digital thermometers, it's important to also use an infrared thermometer gun to measure surface temperatures and to read different areas of the enclosure. There should always be a temperature gradient, and for vertical enclosures, generally the highest part of the habitat will be the hot side, while the bottom is the cool region. Next, getting into the grow lights and weather effects, I'm using the Fluval aquasky 3.0 LED light. This product uses the Fluval Connect app, which allows you to create your own lighting schedule. I set my lights to have a sunrise and sunset so that it is in sync with the basking light. You can also schedule one weather effect per day. For my schedule, I set a thunder and lightning storm on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays for 4 minutes. The flashing lights can be pretty frequent, so I try not to have it on very long to reduce harm to the Tokay Gecko's eyes. Finally, getting into the rain system, I'm using the Moistenland reptile misting system, which I got off Amazon. Unlike most other misting system setups, I'm not using the spray nozzles. Instead, I rely on the airline tubing. From the kit, I really only use the black airline tubing, zip ties, and of course the central control pump. I first start by poking a hole in the side of the enclosure and sliding in the appropriate length of the airline tubing. I use the zip ties to hold the tubing close to the screen top and direct it in a serpentine shape across the roof of the enclosure in a way that avoids blocking the lights. I also use an airline adapter to put clear tubing under the LED hood so it doesn't block any lighting. I then use an X-Acto knife to poke tiny holes separated throughout the tubing and use glue to close the end of the tube to create pressure. Once that was done, I cut the first end of the tube to connect with the outlet of the control pump. Then I attach the tubing for the inlet part. The ending for this tube has a filter cap and is placed in the distilled water jug. Distilled water is ideal to prevent mineral buildup, but also for the nepenthes. Next, I plugged it in and tested it out. Initially, it sprayed much quicker than I liked, so to fix this, I attached an airline flow control valve and set it to where the water dripped. For the schedule, I programmed it to rain for 30 seconds every 3 hours. If you can time it just right, you can get it to be in sync with the weather effects from the lights. Alternatively, you can get the smart Wi-Fi enabled reptile mister and use an app to schedule it to rain exactly during the thunderstorm. However, it does require a 2.4 GHz band frequency, which my router cannot support. Lastly, to give the ultimate naturalistic experience for your animal, you can use a speaker with an alarm set to sync up and play during thunderstorms and other weather effects. I personally prefer to do this manually so that it's not on 24/7. The primary reasons I decided to set up a rain system is 1. Maintaining humidity in a screen enclosure since it can be pretty difficult, and the second reason is because in their previous enclosure, I used a dripper which would be the only time they drink over leaves. Additionally, although I will still be misting every now and then, tokays tend to dislike it and get pretty defensive. The reason I created a natural sunset and sunrise effect is because I feel like a sudden onset of light from a timer can sometimes be startling and unnatural. It also gives those crepuscular and nocturnal animals time to naturally alter their behavior based on the time of day. So yeah guys, if you liked this video, please make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.